Hello, everyone, and welcome to Theory into Practice. Today, it's a long time coming, this interview. We've gone back and forth several times. And scheduling, it's ultimately this guy's way too busy, way too important, above my pay grade. But I would like to welcome Drew Downing to the show.
I'm really excited and stoked to be here. This will
Yeah,
be fun.
I can see it in your face, dude. So, but let me ultimately Drew. Why don't you tell everybody ultimately a little bit more about yourself, but also what is it you're doing and where you came from?
Yeah, good, good questions. So, my name's Drew. I have a hand in health disaster one way or another for the last 15 years or so. Right now, I'm doing a couple things, different ventures. One's most of my times with a company called Uplift Federal, and we do federal consulting. So all the fun acronym agencies, FEMA, ASPR, all those type of things, SBA, and help a lot on the health disaster side. Right now, we're putting a lot of our energy into the FEMA flood risk map program, which is making those flood maps and products and helping them manage that program. So it's a huge effort, big program, a lot of great people there putting in a very mission oriented people there doing some great stuff. So helping there. And then also founded a company called Logista, which helps on a lot more granular disaster level with logistics management. So it's a software for all our EM and public health friends, tracking their stuff and trying to make projections of what they need when they need it so they can operationalize that. So hopefully trying to make their life easier. So that's where I spend most of my professional time. And then I try to be outside the rest of the time one way or another. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'd like to talk about your activity around emergency management in general and your level of content that you put out there for other emergency managers to learn from, to be a part of, to actually potentially, you put a lot of job postings out there to help feed that. What drives you behind the level of interest that you're putting into the profession or the future professionals of emergency management?
I'm really into this thing called Strength Finder, and it's by the good people at Gallup. So they do a lot of research, but I'm a huge believer in just revolving your day around strengths, whether that's professional life, personal life, whatever it is. The more we put in energy into really identifying, hey, I'm really good at these things. It's often a handful of things, and I'm okay or bad at the rest. And the more we can get comfortable with that, the more fun my day becomes and the more fun my job has become over the years, the more stuff I've gotten done that I wanted to get done. It sounds like a basic concept, but it's really been a huge catalyst for me. Stuff I share online is really just, hey, what are the few things I'm really good at? I'm really good at connecting people. I really enjoy people. I enjoy learning what they're good at. I'm really good at putting people in the right seat. So when they're on a team, where do they go on that team? And I'm really good at putting up the plumbing, the structure, the conduits for a team. So that team can go out, hit the ground running, support them from the rear, and really clear the road for them. Those kind of three things there, they manifest themselves in different ways for me. But one way is online, sharing that. That's just what I often try to do is the more I can revolve my life, my work around those three things, it's worked out better for me.
Yeah, you put out some really great content, and it makes you think too. A lot of stuff you're putting out there. You put out some pretty good statistics. I've even asked where'd you get your information from, so I
Yeah.
could go look at it, because
Yeah.
it's very beneficial, especially when you're looking at employment rates or salary for an individual or potential the indiscrepancies behind the stress that goes along with the day to day. So there's a lot of good information that you're putting out. So I want to acknowledge that. And when I see stuff, I save stuff. I send stuff to people, and I even
Oh, that's great.
reach out to you and be like, "Hey, where can I find more of what you're putting out there?" So I
That's very
wanted
good.
to say I appreciate that. And if you don't follow Drew, especially on LinkedIn, I would encourage you to do that, because he does put out a lot of great information, a lot of information that you definitely will learn from. And he does put out jobs and quite with the salaries attached, which is also fun for if you're looking to excel or get into a specific field of emergency management, which I've always liked. But what brought you? Let's talk about, because you're obviously, and I'm looking at your LinkedIn right now, and you're obviously an innovator. But in your LinkedIn, it basically says about you. It just says keep on innovating. That's all it says there. So, what is it that you're in? What brings it? How's your mind working when it comes to emergency management? How to apply innovation into emergency management? Because we always need it. We need that creativity. I try and be a creative thinker. We ultimately have to be creative in what we do, but applying that critical thinking and the strategic skills and to be creative. Where does
Yeah.
that come from in you?
I feel in our field in emergency management and public health, one of the things that I think we do really good at is structure, right? Whether it's ICS or these other structures we have to create order out of chaos or create some more black and white and some gray areas is something we're really good at. The kind of downside to that, I think, is it can sometimes stunt innovation, and it doesn't allow our mind to wander. It doesn't allow us to make some wrong turns to eventually get to the right. And I think I'm seeing a lot more innovation in the space, which is great. And there's other reasons too, right? Often we're short staffed, we're short budgeted, we have tight deadlines. So it's not exactly an environment where you want to ideate, you want to try things. But going back to some of my things that I'm good at and I found success in is putting even structure around ideating, putting structure around innovating. With the teams that I eventually get to help with, we have ideation meetings. So every other week, we spend an hour and a half, and there's a structure there of how you set those items up ahead of time. Who you invite. Ideating isn't for everyone. If you're an action-oriented person who's an activator and you like checklists and getting stuff done, you may want to know what's at the end of the ideation meeting to what to activate. It may stress you out to be in an ideation meeting where it's just ideas, but we got to keep giving people the space to do that. We got to give them, as any kind of leader, the structure, the plumbing, the environment to ideate. Invite those people in, really give them the space, the time, the ways to submit things. I even get as granular as ideation templates. If you have an idea, what's the cost? What's the risk? What's the chance of winning? What's the details? What's the purpose behind it? And what's next steps? Everybody fills one of those out. We put that to a capture list that goes on there. Maybe we start that idea now. It's real easy. Maybe it sits on there for 2 years because the market's not right, the team's not right, the funding's not there, but those align later. We don't want to miss that though. So that goes to a capture list. Some of those from the capture list can go to the ideation meeting every 2 weeks. And let's ideate, let's talk about it. And sometimes out of those ideation meetings, I know we, again, love clarity and action in our industry, but we don't always need action out of some of those ideation meetings. We need to give the people the space to wander, to think about what could be done, optimization or new ideas. I'm big on innovating because I think there's smarter ways to do some stuff, but I think we also have to give people, to make it real, it can't just be talking ideas. We got to have a process to implement, to come up, to have those conversations, if that makes sense to you.
It absolutely makes sense to me, because I love systems and process, ultimately to make our jobs easier, right? And when it comes to emergency management, so much of it is repetitive. So it's easy to say, okay, we need a system and process behind this because it happens however often it might happen. It may happen monthly, it may happen yearly, semi-yearly, whatever it may be. We understand. I just wrote some articles, actually a series of articles on insanity, repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting different result. As an emergency manager, disaster management, we see the same things over and over again, and how do we expect a different result when we're not changing the behavior that drives up to it? And being able to innovate and ultimately be creative and have that room to do so is not really found in emergency management at its deepest levels. And when you have limited staffing, as you mentioned, or no staffing whatsoever in emergency management, it's hard to allow yourself to take experiment a little bit more, to be more creative, more. But I think if we as individuals took that on a little bit, changed our mentality about how we did things, it may very well change not only the trajectory, but also the growth in our profession. Because we have to engage people in different ways. And that's one of the reasons why communications is such a big deal to me, is because I feel like we need to communicate in such higher levels than we currently do, but in such ways that people understand who we are, what we do, why it's important, how it benefits them. That's why marketing and presentations and leadership skills, these all take place, but it's idea of actually taking the time to become better. So being able to innovate, having the idea, be able to have those meetings where you're like, yeah, this is what this meeting's about. You don't hear that a lot. That's one of the reasons why I want to speak to you and have you come speak to the audience, is because we need more of that. We need more of that ability, but also that permission that I think we're going to do this, that you got permission to just throw out ideas and let's just talk about it.
It's funny. I think we're so wired to be a little fear mindset, right? Even biologically, there's some survival benefits to that, to have a healthy dose of fear. The more I get comfortable with, sometimes my fear is an overreaction to what the potential outcomes could be. Usually, I'm usually right more than not that I'm over fearful. It just doesn't play out. And I think that ties into innovation ideas. We think of, oh, if I try this, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of resource, it might not work, it might break something. In all my career, rarely have I broken anything, a system, a model, a team. And the more I can get that fear under control and I get more comfortable, just like a muscle you use in a sport or an athletic, and you're getting better at it, the more you can try. And if it works, stick to it, adopt it, adjust it along the way. If it doesn't, get rid of it. And that's something my team at Uplift Federal, we're a small team, but that's something I love about small teams. If you hire well and you put the processes in place, you have a process for reviewing ideas. You have a process for reviewing changes, for lessons learned. And if it makes sense, let's put it in and let's implement it throughout here and we can adjust. And if it doesn't, let's put it aside. And have you been part of a team that has been able to implement change, even things like lessons learned? And that's not an easy feat to implement lessons learned. Sometimes they're policy change, sometimes they're behavior change. But have you been part of a team that successfully done that?
I can actually say, yeah, I have. It's definitely not easy. When you go to the lessons learned, we learn them, but do we ever apply the lessons that we learn? But it goes back to that, these articles that I just wrote on the insanity. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote them. And it was one of the reasons, big reason I also wrote, did we really learn our lesson? Is because we learn them. Yeah, it's easy to say, oh yeah, we learned this thing and we solved this, but did anything really change, especially behavior? But I think a lot of it, to really change behavior, you have to change thinking and understanding. And it's hard to do that unless you understand, okay, how do I communicate the need or the necessity of that? That's one of the reasons why I started studying communications at such a higher level. I've studied leadership almost my whole life. Understanding leadership doesn't really necessarily tell you how to create change in an organization, in an industry, or an individual. It's understanding human behavior. And I've studied human behavior pretty significantly, and that leads to communication. And I love that you mentioned you go to that level of fear that's there. Biologically, we're 75% negative on the negative side, biologically. Like our minds are programmed to be fearful, and that comes from our need for survival. We have to be negative in order to, like, okay, I don't want to go there because I want to die. I don't want to do this because I want to die. So but when we're trying to grow and expand our thinking and be creative and be strategic, it's a level of thinking outside that comfort and that fear, and it's acknowledging it. And most of all the research that I've done and all the experts that have said, once you label it, once you actually label that fear and acknowledge that fear, it goes away. It goes away, but we don't understand that. So being a part of a team like that myself, it's not necessarily been about lessons learned. It's about implementing processes, procedures to prevent certain things from happening, like establishing an emergency management program. I've gotten really well. I've established 4 emergency management programs throughout my career where I've actually
Holy
started
smoke.
from the ground up and built them out and then left them in the hands of the organization. So I've done 4 of those. And all that boils around that is coming in there and really orchestrating the way that we build out a program. But it's a lot of how I've done it. And this is what makes why I preach what I preach. And I say preach, I don't like the term, but it's what I do. I preach. But it's about changing someone's viewpoint on what they do and why they do it and why it's important. And once you make it about them, it's a lot more easier for them to say, okay, I can buy it. I could actually contribute to this because it benefits, it's in protection of me. And one of the things that I've found throughout my career is that most people, and I say most people, most organizations, they usually have one person maybe doing the job of an emergency manager. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's only one person responsible for emergency management. And I've become very good at building. I'm the guy doing the job. We have a whole team within the organization that focuses on that thing, even though I'm the one getting paid to do the thing. So it's a level of, it changes for me. You hear buy-in a lot in emergency management. You got to get buy-in. We got to get buy-in. I go outside of the buy-in aspect of things and I try to incorporate ownership. There's that level of ownership because It's one thing to buy into it and say, okay, I'll allow that to happen. It's another thing to say that not only is that going to happen, I want to take part in that. I want to contribute to the outcome. And it boils down to, if you take those lessons learned, actually apply them, but
Hmm.
you are able to communicate it in such a way that it makes sense to them. They understand why it's beneficial to them, and it's beneficial to the people that surround them. And then they want to take that participation and engagement. So that's where kind of how I've approached it in lessons learned, because and you hear that this is how we've always done it, and
Yeah.
best practices, but best practices aren't always best practices, right? They're just what's, you know what I mean? It's a best practice.
Yeah.
Is it really, or is it just common practice? So you got to. So I love what you're doing as far as applying that level of thinking, because a lot of that comes from that creative, those creative sessions. A lot of new things and innovation comes from that. But also, you think of something like, we've been doing it this way for a long time, but this would be better.
Yeah.
This would be streamlined. It's a new process, a new system, it's a new procedure that could make it that much better. And that comes from actively trying versus, oh, this is the way we've always done it, so we're just going to leave it alone. Really, is that the best way to go about, especially when people's lives, their livelihoods, their homes, the property, the environment, all are dictated by the actions we take or don't take in our everyday. So that's the way I look at things, as it relates to, like, how do I make it better?
Let me, I'm, you brought up change management, Dan, and it's something I've been dabbling in the last couple years a little bit more and learning a lot more about. There's strategic planning, and then there's the whole change element and the whole different discipline of change management that I have some experience with strategic planning, and I forget the stat, but it's something like 80 to 85% of strategic plans at organizations don't make it off the shelf. We'll write the plan, we'll get the team together, leadership buy-in, as you said, not ownership, and then it just sits there. And that whole change management part is, how do you then implement this and bring an organization into the next maturity level it wants to get to? And you've stood up 4 organizations, you said, or implemented the EM programs within there. There's a saying, culture eats strategy every day for lunch. So if you don't have the culture, you're not going to get the strategic initiatives you want implemented eventually. And I've worked with some organizations and some teams that say they really want to transform and change, but if they don't have the leadership, the culture for that, it's almost just, what are we doing? We're just spinning wheels and coming up with strategic priorities, and they're not ready for that change yet, because some of that leadership doesn't have the ownership, as you said. How have you ran into something like that where they've wanted change, but the culture's not there yet to be ready to be changed, or there's not bold enough leadership to make those decisions? And have you ran into anything like that too?
Yeah, I have. I can absolutely say I have, and it's been strong. It's been stronger in some organizations versus others, and a lot of it is more difficult to overcome sometimes. But I think what really drives that and changes that, because you can boil that down to a strategic plan that just never makes it off the shelf. Well, most emergency operations plans don't make it off the shelf either. As they get written, they get put on shelf, but it's a level of consistency that doesn't take place, especially around those who are supposed to be doing the job.
Yeah.
And that consistency comes from proactivity. Like, it has to be a proactive, consistent approach to what it is you're doing. It's easy to dismiss something when you don't hear about it ever, or only ever so often that you hear about it. It's an inkling that's there, but it's so easy to say, well, put it off to the next time. But if you have somebody who's proactively doing what they're supposed to be doing
Mhm.
consistently, you build that culture over and over. As a repetition, you start to build it, and they're like, when they see, when Dan's here comes Dan, we know what he's going to talk to us about, right? Here comes Dan, we know he's what he wants to bring in there. Oh, here comes Dan, he's good. But when you only hear from me when I'm doing that one time a year required plan or required exercise that I have to do, then
Yeah.
there's no buy, there's no ownership there. But if you're hearing from me every week, every month about the things that I'm doing, what I'm doing, how I'm doing, who I'm talking to, who I'm working with, what I'm developing, how I'm developing, what your part is in that, you change the culture over time. And but it's real easy to dismiss that, especially if you don't hear about it that often. And I think
Yeah.
that's where a lot of emergency management offices and departments and individuals really go wrong, is that they only show up when they're needed.
Hmm.
They need to be showing up when they're not needed. They need to be building those relationships, promoting that training, writing that plan, changing that plan, exercising that plan, engaging those people. And it just is not consistent enough to be one of those things that they're like, okay, we need to encompass this now. Like it's become culture to encompass this versus here he comes. We got to listen to his 1 year required thing. We got to do it's mandatory once a year to do this thing. And oh, freaking Dan. No, it's hey Dan, he's here. He's here to do this thing. So it's a process. It doesn't just happen. It takes effort. But it takes intentional effort. Like you have to be doing it all the time. And that's one of the reasons. Another reason why it boils back down to, for me, why communications is such a big deal. Like marketing plays a big part in that. Like how do you market yourself, market your program, market your training, market your initiatives that you put out there? It's all about getting information and you in front of people. It's like a product. You're a product. You're the product that you have to get in front of people. And they need to invest in you. Like they need to say, if I don't listen to Dan, I could be in trouble, which is being, I could be killed. I could lose my home. I could lose my income. If we lose this organization, I don't have income. I can't pay for my home and feed my family. It's a compounding thing that it really boils down to the amount of effort, intentional effort that we put in every day. But that comes from consistency. If we don't do it, it's like your health, right? I'm in this new health kick. I used to be really fit. I used to be an athletic, and it used to be, right? I'm making myself back into that again. But that comes from, and I like everything we do in life can be boiled down to our health and our fitness level. And this is how consistent you are in what you do and how you eat and how you train and how intensity you are. It's all about consistency. I can go work out for 9 hours. Simon Sinek says this best. He says that you can go work out for 9 hours, but you're not going to be in better shape. But if you work out for 30 minutes for 3 months, you're going to be in way better shape because it happens over time. And it's just the same thing with anything that we do, especially if we're trying to implement new strategy. The tactics that come from that strategy is where the change comes from. I can put a strategic plan out there, but if you're not actively putting the tactics in place to make that strategy a realization, it's never going to happen. But it's actively doing the thing, right? Tactical follows strategy. You strategically know what you want to do, then you tactically figure out how I'm going to do it. And I think we forget about the tactical part sometimes. We're so caught up in response all the time, and it doesn't really benefit us as emergency managers.
You're right. And I think we're on some kind of, if we're not on the cusp, we're getting there, I think, where there's going to be a big pivot of funds, of attitude, right? The response is going to always have to happen. There's going to have to be a lot more concerted effort to mitigation, prevention, this stuff. And it's going to be a complete, back to that change management culture change. The consistency to me is so key to all that. You bring it up, and it's such a super tool. And it's such one that I think we hear a lot, but to actually implement it, it's really easy to get off track, right? Whether it's your own health, as you say, if I stop today and I stop tomorrow, it's really easy just to stop something. And it's the same thing I think in work, whatever your industry is, there's so much power of just staying the course a little bit, even if it's not a win, just keep doing it over and over. You brought up relationships, which I think is one of the things I think is like a core principle in what we do in emergency management. In order to make real relationships and not just them to be transactional in nature, it goes back to consistency to me. And I see the people who do it best put their needs second. And it's not just a saying. They really move their ego to the side. They put their needs second, and they consistently keep getting touch points and asking, how are you doing? What's your organization doing? They learn about the other person's strategic plan and their organization, their biggest pain points. They learn about her family, his family. They learn about that person consistently. How can I help you? How can my health department be of service for you when there is a hazmat incident? What is it we need to do to help you? And it's never not come around and paid back dividends to me. And we eventually get to my needs. We eventually get to what it is that was really going to help our organization thrive. But to do that, you got to be consistent. You got to keep going to that person and seeing how you can help them, what their needs are, what their biggest pain points are. Let them talk, let them share, get them out of their office space to some neutral zone. And I think it's just such an underutilized skill, and it applies to every industry all the time.
It really does. It boils down to you're more likely to help somebody versus someone you don't. You're more likely to help somebody you care about over just somebody. You got to build those relationships up to a point where you know who you're working with. You actually care about their safety and well-being, and that is a two-way street, right? They care about you and they care about your well-being. So when it comes down to it, you're helping each other. It's not just me. Yeah, my overall arching goal is to be of service, to be helping, and to be that. But overall, we're building a relationship. It's not necessarily okay. Oh, here comes they always asking me for something. So whenever they see you, you're always asking me for something. No, I'm always asking how you're doing. I'm always trying to invest in you. I'm always trying to add value. When it comes down to you build it's more than just an acquaintance or a net. It's
Mhm.
there's an invested interest into your well-being. So when I come and say, hey, I need this thing, or we're doing this thing, would you like to be a part of it? The answer is yeah, absolutely. What can I do to help? It's a different thing than when a friend comes to you or someone you care about comes to you and asks you for something, you're more likely to be, oh, absolutely, how can I help you? Versus just somebody you pass in the hallway or pass in a meeting or at a conference. That's why you build those relationships, why you network, that's why you collaborate, that's why you support each other. It's the building of those relationships that overall you're going to be like, if they call on the phone, especially if they're a friend. I've made some great lifelong friends in this industry, but whether they're a friend or just someone that I care about, I'm more likely to be like, absolutely, what can I do to help? Versus I got to put my time somewhere else. So I'd rather not get involved. Emergency management is one of the most collaborative networking relationship building industries out there. And that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with it to begin with, is because I got to work with everybody.
Yeah.
I got to work with everybody.
Yeah.
And that was one reason why I fell in love with it and why I continue to grow, but also why I'm so vocal about growing the profession, but the professional doing the job. If I can
It's,
grow the profession, will grow better.
I
And
think that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I think that's why I do what I do.
The consistency, even there's something too of, I think sometimes we're a little too fast with letting something cook enough too. And that goes back to relationships, even that even when we want to put our best foot forward, we meet twice and then go, hey, can you sign this MOU? An MOUs, how many health departments I see that had 8 MOUs with 8 different schools that can use for pods. Then when it becomes time, they say, go take a hike because we're not opening up our, you're not legally obligated. The point of an MOU is to get understanding and clarity and buying in ownership. And you do that through relationships. And an MOU will come much down the road. I know it makes it feel good that you checked it off on a grant and your director knows and all this, but we're too often just not letting things cook enough. And I think back, I had a really cool job at one point helping out the Department of Homeland Security in a biodefense program. And part of this was to do some NISI, some national security events in Los Angeles. And some of these events take 12 or more months to plan. And I got to work with some awesome people, wild people I never thought I'd get to work with, like US Secret Service and the FBI WMD coordinators and local health departments. And part of this is all these meetings ahead of time. And when I did the role the best, it was when I didn't bring up our biodefense program's needs, which there was many strategic, tactical, for months. And I would meet with the Secret Service and just ask them, hey, what are you guys doing? What's your biggest need? What's your biggest pain points? How have you done in the past? When's an event look successful for you? Next to the WMD quarter for the FBI. Hey, what's your biggest pain points? What do you guys need to be successful? What's your fear of this not going well? What does it look like when it goes well? Then to the local hazmat team, same questions. And then do it for the next month and the next month. And then all of a sudden, they're asking me of, hey, Drew, how can I help you? How can I help you with your equipment where you need to put it, with your ops, your SOPs? What do we need to sign off on? And it just opens up. But if I jumped that too early and started the meeting with, hey, I listened to yours, next meeting, we're going to talk about me. And that's not the natural progression where that relationship's going, it wouldn't have worked nearly as well. Because once you're setting up something as complex as an event, nonetheless a response, it's going to go like this. I'm going to need to call you that there's not power at this place. I'm going to need to call you that security's blocking this. There's going to need to be so much problem solving that we'll get to my needs eventually, but I need to build that relationship first. And I can't make it, it needs to go in an oven, not a microwave.
No, I 100% agree with that. One of the things that I've been hearing, I've actually heard hearing a lot lately, is that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with a team, right? So
There
you
you
got to
go.
ultimately we can get to where we're going really quickly, but how long will it last? Is it just a one and done, or are you trying to build something that will last forever? And we're trying to build teams and coordination and support mechanisms and relationships that will last forever. Like we want to build these things and ultimately having that relationship, but it does take that intentional effort to say, I need to find out more about you first. And then how can I help you? And then ultimately, yeah, it will circle back around to me. and what we're trying to do here as the strategy unfolds. But
Mhm.
yeah, I 100% agree. The relationships are priceless. Building a quality relationship is priceless and will pay huge dividends when you're not just always out looking out, how do I better myself, or how do I better my organization, or how do I make myself look good? It's about truly investing in people, in the success of the overall shared vision. And when you're working on a program like you were just mentioning, you got a shared vision. You all want to be successful. You all don't want to look like you dropped the ball, but it's a shared understanding, shared vision, shared direction. That comes from relationship building. If you're just there to have that checkbox to say that, oh yeah, I just attended this meeting because I had to, or I just took a part in it because I was supposed to. No, you want to show up. You want to contribute. You want to make sure everybody's successful because of your success. So yeah, it definitely boils down to those relationships. And the more you can build those in advance of the thing happening, right? Especially the bad thing happening, the better you're going to be in when that happens when it comes to response. And I think the response part of everything that we do, it's always going to be important. But I think the biggest problem we have in overcoming that is that's what everybody sees. They don't
Yeah.
see all the stuff, the back ends, and how these little things can help prevent stuff or prepare us or mitigate. They just see license because the big bad thing happened. So it's so much harder to get over those things when we can save so much more money, lives, property,
Yeah.
environment by doing all this stuff in advance. And that all comes from relationships, but also to portray, like actually vocalize that and get people to understand it. A lot of what I feel like a lot of our shortfalls in emergency management, we don't get enough people to really understand what we do and why it's important. And a lot of that boils down to the practitioner as well, because if you ask 100 different emergency managers to define emergency management, they're going to tell you different things. It's just like
Sure.
leadership too. You tell 100 different people to define leadership. It's going to be different, but it's how we need to come together. We need to have a shared vision. We need to have, and there's some of that boils down to standardization as well. But when you really can't tell people what you do, when you don't have the elevator speech down pat to really
Mhm.
tell people enough to understand why you're important to them, that's where I think a lot of us really on the back end, that's where we fail because it's easy to say we're going to cut your budget, we're going to cut your position, we don't need that position, or whatever it may be. It boils down to us not being able to prove our worth, and that comes from building relationships too. Because if I am telling you the same thing over and over again, that's one thing. But if I have other people from different organizations telling you the same thing, you're more likely to listen to them because you're never a prophet in your own backyard. You're never a prophet in your own hometown, is what they usually say. You have to go somewhere else to preach the message because nobody knows you. But if you try and everybody knows you, they're like, he's always talking the same thing. But if you came to my organization, more likely people are going to say, yeah, Drew knows what he's talking about. If I go to your organization, people are going to be like, Dan, he knows what he's talking about. And you've been saying the same thing for a year. You know what I mean? It's just the way it is. But we have to be doing that for each other all the time. Like it can't always be coming from me. It needs to come from outside voices as well, because you're more likely to add credibility. And I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy following you on LinkedIn, because you're just adding credibility to what I've been saying all along too. You're just adding more and more information that backs up my argument, right? That we need to be doing more as an individual. We need to be doing more as a profession. We need to be taking on whatever it is. I can say, hey, look at Drew's saying the same thing. And sometimes a little bit more creative than I am. Oh, look at that. I can say, look at that. And I think we can do that for each other as well.
Yeah.
But we have to be willing. We have to have
Yeah.
and that's why the creativity, as you mentioned, that having those idea sessions is amazing. But it's the ability to how do we get attention? How do we drive that attention to us? But we want the attention for the right reasons. We're not just saying, look at me. Just look at this because this benefits you. This can save your life. This can save your house. This can save your job. And we're telling them that. But they don't always listen because it's not relevant to them. And we're not making it relevant to them. They hear it. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you should plan. You should prepare. You should mitigate. You should do all this stuff. But how does it impact them? And I think if we were really concentrate our efforts to really get that attention in the right places at the right times, we could change the world, right? And I mean that literally. The people who think they can change the world are the ones that usually do, right? They're the ones that have a big grand vision and but they sound crazy. They sound crazy when they're saying it until they do it. And I think when it comes down to it, we could save a lot more lives. We could save a lot more property. We can do a lot more less damage to the environment if we could teach people in the right order why it's important that they do these things. It's easy to say, go do this, don't do this.
Yeah.
Until they know why, there's no real action taken.
You bring some up, Dan. I want to take our minds there because my innovation, we talked a bit about and the industry as a whole of emergency management. I always try to do like an exercise of what do you think emergency management looks like 25 years from now? And take a step back first and think 25 years ago, and NIMS is getting its feet as far as getting implemented in all these things, and how much mature of where we are than from we were 25 years ago, and thinking 25 years in the future. At its best, what do you think we're doing? What do you think it looks like? And I don't have a good answer. I'm curious.
Sadly, I think it doesn't look much different than it does right now. And it goes back to what both of us have been saying, is that best practice. Is it really best practice, or is it common practice?
Mm-hmm.
And it's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting that different result. That never comes. The different result doesn't come. And I think it boils down to, if we don't have a level to really grow as emergency managers and emergency management overall as a profession, if it's not going to come just because I want it to. It's going to come because we come together and we decide, okay, we need to change the way things are done. And a big part of that is standardization of the profession. It's so everybody does it differently. Everybody's got a different name to their organization. They got a different understanding of what it is they do, who they serve, why they serve it, the individual that does the job, their qualifications, not qualified. Are they trained properly? Is it just because they had 20 years in fire service that they're an emergency manager, or do they really know emergency management? These are all big things that contribute to the profession of emergency management, especially the future of emergency management. And we are changing a lot of things at higher levels, but if they don't, at those higher levels, if they don't contribute to the lower levels, it's all just going to stay the same, especially when FEMA has the continued reputation of just being a bank. FEMA's going to come in and they're just going to pay for it. We're good. If it happens, we don't need to do that. FEMA's going to pay us, and they're just going to give us money. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. But people in their head see that and they're like, FEMA's going to come give us money. That's not how it works. And until we get it down at the lower levels, people really understand. It's all about education. We need to be able to teach them, have them really understand how the system works and how they need to change at their levels as well. The government can change all it wants, but still the perception there is, oh, they're just going to give us money. They're going to, and especially when they're considered a bank at this point as a check writing industry, just going to give them money to let them do their own. It's not how it works, but it's a perception that's there. And that level of standardization is not going to happen at my level. It's going to happen at the top level. We have to have this type of quality individual doing this job in this profession with right? I can't come in and say, you have to do this thing and this, because I'm at the bottom, one of the bottom levels of it. As an emergency manager, I'm not at the top level in government. But if you can come in there and we can get more of that connectivity, that relationship that says these things have to happen in order to do the thing that you're expecting, that money, that standardization, that's where our profession will really change. But when you go back to it, so many people continue to say, and it's not wrong, but at the same time, when you look at the timeline, you're like, how is that they see emergency management still in its infancy? I equate that to like Baby Yoda at this point. Like we're 50 plus years old and we're still falling down. Like we need to start getting out there. We need to get into adolescence. We need to start making mistakes and fixing them. And when you look at other professions, they've gone back a lot longer, but they've also had a lot more standardization. You have to have this type of training before you can go specialize anywhere else. You have to be trained in medicine. You have to be trained in the legal profession. You have to be trained to be a law enforcement officer. You have to be trained to be a fireman. You have to be trained to be an emergency medical technician. These are training you have to take place before you go out into the field and learn to do the job. As emergency managers, we have a lot of responsibility, and we have a lot riding on the decisions that we make. And if we don't make the right decisions because we're not trained properly, people die. So we need more of that. And that's where our profession is lacking over in the growth long term. In the short term, we're making a lot of changes. We're seeing growth in mitigation and seeing growth in resilience, even though resilience means different things to different people. We're seeing growth in the preparedness. But that boils down to, is that long term? Is that going to be long term? or is it just the word of the day, right? Resilience is the word of the day. And some people think it means climate change. Some people thinks it means how fast we respond or recover from an emergency or a disaster.
Hmm.
Neither one of those are wrong, because resiliency is the same thing. Like, it's like, how do you define it and how do you apply it? It boils down to, okay, how are you taking action to do the thing? However you define whatever it is you define, what are you doing, actively doing, to make it happen? And a lot of people, that activity, that proactivity, it's not there. It's the response. They wait until the bad thing happens, then they respond to it. And I don't like that. I think we're very reactive in what we do. And we need to be on the front end of that, which is mitigation, preparedness, and
Hmm.
ultimately, if we can, prevention. Prevention is heavily tied to terrorism, but I think we can prevent a lot of things by applying mitigation and preparedness in what we do.
Yeah, I like the education component you brought up, because there's a lot of factors that are going to be hard to, right? Funding, thinly resourced. I think of 25 years and what would it look like if it was operating at level 10? There's a few things that come to my mind. And the first one is it needs to shift to mitigation prevention at some point and a lot of more effort there. The responders are just tired. 90% of FEMA has been involved in stuff this year, something like that. People are exhausted, and you got to put more in mitigation prevention in that wheelhouse. So how do you do that? I'm not sure. I know engine and the resilience. You're right. It's really hard to define. It's a wide. I've been on workshops of trying to define resilience, and we left without a great definition. It's hard. I think engineering's part of it, and that's going to have a bigger hand in emergency management, where we're being a conduit for that, and maybe we have engineer liaisons. I don't know what it is, but that's a huge part of it. Something that comes to me too, and I don't even have it fully thought, but community oriented, community minded. Our country is great with the history of individualism, which has really been one of our strengths to do a lot of awesome things. I think there has to be, when it comes to disaster, some shift on and us being the educators of this, of a community minded an approach to things, and really starting at the local level of community minded. I don't know what that looks like, and it's very abstract. And I also think, as you say, like education 25 years from now, of how do we double down and 10 times down being the educator components in those communities, the connectors. If we're going to be community minded, we got to have someone carrying that flag. And that's a huge effort. And it can't be one person who's a liaison in the office or a community and outreach and engagement person. We're just setting that person up for, at best, minimal results, but really not supporting the setting her or him up for failure. But an entire agency that is just grabbing the community and pulling together ahead of time in this mitigation prevention space.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's really disheartening as it relates to just our, the world, not just our country, the world, is that you don't really hear community until something bad's happened. It's just something bad happens, and then the community comes together. Yeah, it's great. I love that they come together. But why is it something bad has to happen
Mhm.
before the community will come together? And we're so divided, especially in the United States right now. Just on everything. Right in this very moment, politics. But politics seems to be, it's evolving to a level of hatred, almost to a level like where race used to hate somebody. Oh, I don't like you because you're white. I don't like you because you're black. Now it's all because you're blue. I don't like you because you're red. It's divisive, and of course, we have instigators that make it worse. But I
Mhm.
think we do need to come together. We need to be more community. It shouldn't matter what political affiliation you are, if whether or not I want to help you, or if I want. It's ultimately, you're a person. You have the right to live. Like, I'm not going to take that away from you because you belong to a specific organization or political party, or you're one color or the other, or what, or one religion or the other. That community really needs to be all the time. Like, it has to be all the time. And I really agree with that 100%. We should be focusing on community all the time, because if you build such a strong community ahead of the bad thing happening, the likeliness that the bad thing happens, number one, goes down. But when the ability to recover from the bad thing happening is
Mhm.
increased tenfold, because you've been together, your partner, your neighbors. there's a level of that relationship building that goes back to that community is big. But when you go down, think about it a little bit deeper than that. As you mentioned, like our first responders, they're tired. Disasters and emergency situations are happening more often, and they're more intense. So they're
Mhm.
happening. So they're happening more, and they're more intensified when they happen. And then we're expanding. All of our focus is on response. If you just respond, you're going to burn out, and you're going to burn out the people, and you're going to burn out the funding, and you're going to burn. But if you build communities and you're doing mitigation, preparedness, and prevention, you're not going to burn out when the bad thing happens because you prepared and prevented and mitigated it, and you work together. You're not just depending on a small group of first responders to do the job, right? So I think that's a big part of it as well. Yeah, we're going to continue to do that until we change that level of thinking. But it's so easy, as I mentioned earlier, because lights and sirens are sexy, man. Lights and sirens. We see it on the news. It's easy to tug at the heartstring and say donate when someone's house is flooded out, or when there's a fire that burned them out, or when the earthquake took out their home or their place of employment. But it's hard to justify in people's head. I can't give money for something that might happen. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Especially hurricanes and fires and tornadoes. What's going to happen? You might not know exactly the day. What's going to happen? And I think we got to get over that. We'll wait and see if it happens. It's a level of that mindset shift too that takes for us to always be that 75% negativity, as I mentioned. It surprises me that we don't spend more time saying we should probably do this so we can avoid that bad thing happening. We're like,
I
we'll
think
just wait
everybody
for it
in
to
the,
happen and then we'll respond to it.
I think folks in public health are in your season, the emergency managers, behavior changed so hard. And I go back and thinking of like when I used to be a lot more involved in like disaster, infectious disease, and pandemic planning type stuff. And I would go to the emergency management, their THIRA, their hazard and risk assessments, which a whole different conversation, how flawed those are with a lack of data and understanding of how prepared we are or not. But it's very easy to put off something. I've spent most of my career in infectious disease and bioterrorism. When you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it, it's easier to put it out of sight and out of mind. And that's the same thing with behavior change. If you, the result may or may not affect you, it's easy to put it off. If it's delayed onset, that's why obesity rates are higher, because you're not having the onset of that result till later. Financial planning is hard for people because you're not usually feeling the hurt of that decision till later. And the same thing goes to prevention in our industry, in our communities. And I'm just so curious now because there is more access to media. We have more information than we've ever want. We have too much, in my opinion, that we shouldn't be consuming all this type of information 24/7. But we have tons of channels coming to us. And there's tons of these disasters, like you said, more higher frequency. Is it getting to a threshold where communities are understanding the value of prevention and mitigation, and they get the buy-in and what that means, because they're seeing it now? And I feel like maybe we are getting closer to that, but it's almost like hitting rock bottom till you get better, whether it's financially, obese, whatever it is. Maybe we're there. Maybe
No,
we're
you're
there.
not
We're
wrong.
seeing
You're
so much.
absolutely not wrong when it comes down to it. Sometimes it does take the worst thing happening before we take the steps needed to ensure that it doesn't happen again. It is kind of ultimately and sadly, that's a lot of how it works. But as much as we see that happening, and I'm not going to say everywhere, because there are a lot of places that are taking the steps needed, or at least trying to take the steps needed to be more mitigative and preparedness in that aspect of things, especially with resilience, right? The new resilience thing, and they're putting mitigation preparedness inside that in a lot of areas, especially with some grant funding that's out there. But I think ultimately, we're never really, and I hope this is true, we're never really going to see the United States of America, other than COVID, but the United
Mhm.
States of America or the world isn't just going to implode, right? And then we got one huge disaster, not talking Armageddon, that resets it all. And if it does, we're not going to be around to see what happens. You know what I mean? So we're seeing little things happen. Like you hit rock bottom and you're at the worst here. You look at what happened in Paradise, all right? That whole town was gone.
Mm.
They're rebuilding it right now, and they're actually doing a really good job. But that's one community, right? We see that happen in that community, and we can get behind that. But it's a level of how often is it happening? We're seeing it happen more, but it's also one of those things too that And I agree, we have way too much information coming at us, and most of it's inaccurate or out of context. So we have that too. We don't really know the context. We don't know how accurate it is. But it's coming at such a level that we don't really honestly have a level to get our understanding foundation before we start trying to have to make decisions or acknowledgement of whatever it is. I think there are a lot of organizations out there, a lot of cities, even governments that are, the United States is one of them, of taking effort to spend more of the effort and the money into hopefully mitigation, preparedness, and prevention. But it's still not where it needs to, especially when it comes to mitigation and in the response aspects of things. When you take that money, you're supposed to build back better than you did. It's a lot of how I define resilience anyway. But organizations people aren't doing that. They take that money and they just go back to business as usual. We're supposed to make it better so that the next time it happens, it's not as bad. But we could continue to see that in each of these jurisdictions, every time it happens, it's just as bad. Why is it just as bad? We just gave you all this money to recover from. What did you do? What did you not do? We have to have more accountability when it comes to that level of things, because in order for us to be back better, to come back faster, to mitigate less lives lost, we have to do the things that are needed from us. And we don't do that necessarily. We just trying to get back to the way things were before so we could go back to business as usual, especially when it's a money making industry, right? It's not about coming back better. It's just about getting revenue coming back in so they can sustain their business, but also pay their employees, which also do their product, it's just a thing. So it becomes about speed versus quality. And I think that's why we need to do that. So we know how to do the speed with the quality. If we can implement quality and speed at the same time, monopolize any market. But it's sometimes it's either or. And if you don't have the time, then you don't implement the quality. And a lot of it is all about time. How fast can we get back to the way we were? And it needs to go, how do we get back to the way we used to be by doing the things we have to do or should do to be better? And that boils down to individualism. Like me as a person, if something bad happens to me, how do I become better so that I can prevent it from happening again? My knowledge is there, my skills there. If it's my fitness level, it's there, right? Like I allow myself to get big. The things that I'm doing now to prevent myself from getting big again, right? It's the stuff you implement and the quality that you put in that has the outcome. But when your overall outcome is speed, it's those who try and lose weight fast by the fad diet, right? The weight comes back. Mm-hmm. And it usually comes back faster and harder, like to get off because you did it wrong. We're not doing it right on the back end. Like we need to be doing quality, not quantity, not speed. But it's hard because people's lives, their livelihood mainly, it depends on that. Money coming in, all these things. Mm-hmm. It's all about how fast we can get back, not how well we can get back in that. And I think a lot of it boils down to us as the individual, making sure that we're doing the right things in our industry. And sometimes you're fighting an uphill battle because you have presidents, vice presidents, mayors, city councils, president telling you, get the thing done, get it done. And you can't do it right. You just got to do it. Yeah. And I think Band-Aids ultimately keep wounds going. They don't let a wound close up.
Yeah, there's a lot of check boxes in our industry, and that's how funding's been structured, of grant deliverables of check boxes, which isn't a good ecosystem always or mindset to framework to operate in. It doesn't mean I think most people try to go above and beyond the checkbox, and they know what prevention, what actual resilience, and what a meaningful relationship is. But I think there's in the future going to need to be a restructure of how those funds are delivered and so they can be leveraged in a healthier way too.
Yeah. And I think too, we can get really granular on this too, but a lot of it boils down to level of responsibility and accountability. Me as an individual, the Dan Scott, no one else should be ready and prepared for whatever may happen, right? I should be planning for that. I should take action. I should do the things that I'm being told to do by the professionals. If I choose not to do that, at what level do you say you chose not to do that? You got to do it. Versus the way things are now is I chose not to do that. Give me my check. I chose actively not to do the thing you told me I should do. when I should do it, how I should do it, I want the money. Give me the money because that's what I deserve that as an individual, as a citizen. Do you really? Like, you were told what to do, how to do it, why to do it, when to do it. You didn't do it. Where's the accountability?
It's a
It goes to
tough
the organization. Same
it's a
thing.
tough one to slice because
Can be very granular, right?
yeah, and there's going to be populations, right, that, and it's not a zero sum game, I think, in my mind, where if we can shift certain part of the population and start with the ones that have the most resources, the ones that are most capable or closest to that capability, and over time we can shift their prevention, mitigation, and then help with the ones that are need more resources because they have less capability. You're always going to have some of those people who aren't going to evacuate in a fire zone because their livestock's there and that's their livelihood, and they're just not going to evacuate to the county fairgrounds with their thing because that's their livelihood. And I understand that there's an emotional connection. We're emotional creatures, and even in disasters we're not going to think logical. But if we can plan around the ones who are willing to participate, no matter their capability, no matter their economic level, the ones who want to participate, that's where you always start with any big project, right? Where there's a strategic plan, a new initiative, grab the energy that's being put out, go with those people, grab those people and run with them. And I think that's where a lot of some of this resilience can really get a foothold and start.
No, I agree. I actually agree with you 100%. But I think it boils back down to we got to start thinking about equity versus equality. And
Mhm.
then it boils down to, okay, how much, if I can get more funding in the mitigation and preparedness, being able to do those things and implement those strategies and give that education, give those tools, give those supplies that are needed in the beginning before the bad thing happens, we can ultimately build that level of preparedness and hope mitigation, but also maybe even prevention on some of these things. But when you boil it down, I can't get any money in that area. I got to wait till something bad happens to get it. And then in the bad thing happen and the money comes, I'm not worried about that at that point in time. I'm worried about getting back to business as usual. And then by the time business as usual comes back around, I don't have the money to do the thing that I should be doing for mitigation. So if I could get the funding or the permissions to do the things in advance,
Yeah.
but boys, it goes back to down to that. But when you boil it down to equity and people who have more means and stuff like that, sometimes the people with less means, they can't afford insurance. They can't afford to stock up on food and water and stuff. They can't afford to go out and buy an emergency prep bag. They can't afford, but if we could equip them with these things in advance and train them how to use it and when to use it and why to use it and why it's in the timing to use it, it would on the back end, right? That's where it boils down to. It's mitigating, it's preventing, it's preparedness. But we need more of that up front where we're still
Up,
back, circles back
up
around. It's
front. And then another thing to that too is consistency, because
yep.
boom or bust, as you say, it's often tied to a disaster that's happening. In my world, it was infectious disease. So when Zika kicks off, there's all this funding real quick. And there's times I got $3 million worth of funding in my jurisdiction and I had to distribute how to spend it. I can't spend 3 million strategically and meaningfully in 6 months that was just thrown on me. I need funding that's consistent, that
Yeah.
I can plan, that I can bank on over a 5-year period, a 10-year period, that I can pull in my partners and promise them it will be there if I'm asking the fire department to do this. If I'm asking law enforcement, the health department. The boom or bust, a whole lot of money at once. It's not even a band-aid sometimes. It doesn't even get used in a
Gives
meaningful
you
way.
another problem. Because then you
It's
get a bunch of
another
stuff that you
problem.
don't use.
Yeah.
That's what happened with 9/11, right? You stocked up all this stuff, we end up throwing it away. And even COVID, COVID happened. We were in a deficit of all this stuff. Now we have all this stuff. Now people are storing it, and most of it's going to be thrown away.
Oh, I get lots of calls that, hey, the state of Utah is accepting any of it. Nope, they asked the same question. Everyone's
Yeah, it's an ongoing cyclical, man. It just
yeah,
continues to. But it's the same thing, expecting a different result. We
yeah.
have to change our processes there, and hopefully it'll come. And I think it will at some point. I think it will. You get the right people paying attention, and it will.
Mm.
But it's difficult. It really is difficult. It's very. We could talk we could go on and on about this. It can get so deep. It can get so granulated, but it can also go very macro as well. Like how big we can, like at what levels does this happen? When you go
Mhm.
down to the macro level, like the micro level of the individual, and then the house and the organization and the city.
Mhm.
It just boils down. And if we don't start doing it properly at the base level,
100%.
it just, yeah. So, like I said, we could talk about this all day. And I know you're very busy. I want to respect that time. Ultimately, Drew, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. We've been trying to get on this for a while. And
Yeah.
I thank you for taking that time. I know you're in Washington. We were talking about that before we started. You're in Washington, D.C. with your project.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that project, by the way.
Thanks.
Let's tell everybody how they can get a hold of you and how they can potentially connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's do it again. Let's have another combo because we can talk innovation and ideas and futuristic stuff all day.
Awesome. I'd love to.
Yeah, right now I'm in DC helping FEMA with a project, something they do well already with the flood risk map. But my company that I work for, Uplift Federal, is helping that one. They can get a hold of me. They can email me, ddowning@upliftfederal.com. If they want to talk logistics, which is another thing that I dive into and help state and local organizations with their inventory management, they can email me, drew@logistaresponse.com. On the service side and federal, if people are really interested in helping on the federal side and with companies, and we work with ASPR and CDC, all those fun acronyms, send me an email. I'm always talking to new people. Our company, Uplift Federal, is growing. So at the end of the day, I like doing interesting things with good people, and I don't care what that is. Right now, it's in the disaster space. So if that's of interest to people, email me, let's connect and talk. So that company's growing. So yeah, I appreciate the time, Dan. It's fun getting to pick your mind. Thank you for everything you're doing on here and with the leadership stuff. I know people consume it and it's valuable for them and for us. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Drew. For everyone who's maybe driving down the road and unable to look at the information, I'll put the contact information inside the show notes. So feel free to do that when you're at a safe place to do so. Don't try and do it on your phone right now. I'll also tie you to a link to Drew's LinkedIn. A lot of information comes through there. It's how I met Drew, and ultimately the information he puts out is definitely valuable. My goal here is for us all to get better, and let's do it together. My name is Dan Scott, and I will talk to you next time.